My name is Clara Bennett. I was 28 when I buried my husband. And before the flowers on his grave had even begun to wilt, his father looked me in the eyes and told me I had no right to the life Daniel and I had built together. The property goes to blood family, Warren Marsh said. He said it quietly, almost politely, as if he were explaining something obvious to a child. I remember staring at him across the funeral reception hall, still wearing the black dress I had borrowed from my sister because I hadn't owned anything appropriate for burying a husband at 28. I remember the smell of lilies, the untouched food, the sound of distant conversations. And most of all, I remember the certainty in Warren's eyes. He thought I was too broken to fight him. He thought grief had made me weak. What he didn't know was that Daniel had left me something far more valuable than property. He had left me the truth. And buried inside that truth was a secret his father had spent decades trying to erase. A secret that would change everything. The church smelled like lilies and candle wax. Daniel would have hated the flowers. He once told me lilies smelled like endings dressed up as apologies. I remembered that as I sat in the front pew, staring at the casket that contained the man who had once made even ordinary mornings feel like something worth waking up for. Daniel and I had been married for 3 years. 3 years of tiny apartments, shared coffee, late-night grocery runs, and arguments over whose turn it was to do the dishes. We hadn't had a perfect marriage. We had something better. We had a real one. We had built it ourselves. And Warren Marsh had never approved of it. He never insulted me directly. Men like Warren rarely need to. He simply had a way of making you feel like an unwanted guest in every room you entered. He believed his son had married beneath the Marsh name, beneath the family, beneath the properties that had belonged to the Marshes for generations. The lake house, the orchard, the old stone office building downtown. I had never cared about any of it. Daniel knew that, but Warren had always assumed that one day I would. After the funeral service, everyone gathered in the reception hall. People spoke in low voices. Someone had placed trays of sandwiches and pastries along the wall, but almost no one touched them. I stood near the coat rack, holding my husband's wedding ring in my hand. I had taken it off because I couldn't bear looking at it on my finger. Then Warren approached me. No hug. No, I'm sorry. Not even my name. Just business. We need to talk about the estate. I looked at him. Not today. There will never be a good day for this, he said. So it's better to be direct. Then he delivered the sentence I would remember for years. The property goes to blood family. You understand that, don't you? For a moment, I couldn't speak. I thought about Daniel's hands. The way he used to rest one on my back whenever we walked through a crowded room. I thought about our apartment. Our photographs. The coffee mug he always used. The little life we had built without asking Warren for a single thing. Finally, I looked at him. I understand what you're telling me, I said. His expression softened with satisfaction. I knew you would. I shook my head. I don't know yet if I understand what's true. For the first time, his expression changed. Only slightly. But I saw it. He wasn't expecting that answer. He walked away without another word. And that was the moment something inside me changed. I stopped grieving long enough to pay attention. The weeks after Daniel's funeral passed strangely. Some days disappeared completely. Other days lasted forever. I went back to work at the city archive because I needed somewhere to put my hands. There was comfort in old records, old deeds, old maps, old names written in careful ink. Grief had taken away almost everything I could control, but documents still obeyed rules. 3 weeks after the funeral, I was helping a colleague research an old property dispute when I saw the name Marsh. I almost ignored it. Then I saw another name beside it. Peter Marsh. I stared at the page. I had never heard that name before. Not once. Daniel had mentioned cousins, aunts, grandparents, but never Peter. I went home that night and couldn't stop thinking about it. The next evening, I opened Daniel's closet. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just wanted to be near something that had belonged to him. At the back of the closet sat a small fireproof box. Daniel had always kept important documents there. Passports, birth certificates, insurance papers. I had avoided it since his death. But that night, I opened it. Inside was our marriage certificate,
His passport.
several old photographs, and beneath them, an envelope. My name was written across the front in Daniel's handwriting. Clara. There was a date beneath it. 8 months before his death. My hands started shaking. Daniel had written it while he was still alive. While I still believed we had years ahead of us. I sat on the floor and held that envelope against my chest. I couldn't open it. Not yet. Because some part of me was afraid that reading the words of a dead man would make his absence permanent. But eventually I opened it, and the first line made my breath catch. Clara, if you're reading this, something has happened that I couldn't fix by simply telling you the truth. I read the letter slowly. Daniel's handwriting was unmistakable.
Calm. Precise.
The same handwriting he used when leaving me notes on the refrigerator. But these words were different. Clara, if you're reading this, my greatest fear has probably come true. My father has always believed that the Marsh name gives him the right to decide who belongs and who doesn't. I know what he's going to say after I'm gone. He'll tell you the property belongs to blood family. Please don't believe him. I stopped reading. My heart was pounding. Daniel had known, not that he would die, but that his father might try to take control of everything afterward. I continued. The property Warren talks about isn't his to simply give away. Grandfather's estate was divided years ago. My share was legally transferred to me, and I made sure my own estate documents were in order. I have left my share to you, but there's something else you need to know. Years ago, I found records concerning someone Dad never talks about. Uncle Peter. Dad wants everyone to believe Peter abandoned the family. He didn't. I don't know every detail, but I know enough to know that Dad's version isn't the whole truth. Then came the line that stayed with me long after I finished reading. If Dad comes after you, don't fight him with anger. He has spent his entire life believing anger is power. Give him something he can't control. The truth. I lowered the letter. For several minutes, I simply sat there. Then I read it again. And again.
Peter.
The missing uncle. The property. The old family records. And Warren's certainty at the funeral. Suddenly, his words sounded different. He hadn't been informing me. He had been testing me. He wanted to know whether I would simply accept what he said. I wasn't going to. The next morning, I called the lawyer whose name Daniel had written at the bottom of the letter. Marguerite Chen. Her office was above an old bakery downtown. When I arrived, she already had a file waiting on her desk. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. Daniel asked me to be ready if you ever came here after his death. I sat down. You knew? I knew he was concerned about his father, she said. I didn't know what Warren would actually do. She opened the file. Inside was a copy of the original family trust. It had been created decades earlier by Daniel's grandfather. Daniel's portion of the family property had passed legally to him, and Daniel had subsequently left that portion to me in his will. Warren had no legal authority to simply reclaim it because I wasn't a Marsh by birth. But then Marguerite placed another document on the desk. This is why Daniel was especially worried. It was an old property record. Peter Marsh's name appeared on it. I looked up. What happened to him? Marguerite folded her hands. That's the question Daniel wanted answered. She explained that Peter had once owned a legitimate share of the family estate. Then, decades earlier, his name had disappeared from the family's property records. Not through a normal sale. Not through a clean inheritance transfer. Something had happened, and Warren had never discussed it. I stared at the document. Where is Peter now? Marguerite hesitated. Daniel hired someone to look for him shortly before he died. I felt cold. Did he find him? Not before his death.
She paused.
But I can try. I thought about Warren. His words at the funeral. Blood family. Then I thought about Daniel's letter. The truth.
Find him, I said.
It took several weeks. During that time, Warren became increasingly impatient. He called repeatedly. He sent messages. He even had one of his attorneys contact me about voluntarily surrendering possession of the lake house. I never argued. I never threatened him. I never told him what I knew. Every time he asked when I would leave, I gave him the same answer. I'll let you know. He mistook silence for surrender. He had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. Marguerite found Peter. He was 71. He lived 3 states away in a small house with a blue front door. When she called him, he initially refused to believe her. He hadn't spoken to anyone in the Marsh family in more than 40 years. But when Marguerite mentioned Daniel's name, everything changed. Peter agreed to speak. I listened to their first conversation over the phone. Peter's voice was thin and tired. Daniel found the records? Yes, Marguerite said. There was a long silence. Then Peter whispered, I always wondered if someone would. He told us what had happened. He hadn't abandoned the family. He hadn't chosen money over them. Warren had forced him out after a dispute over his share of the estate. Peter had refused to surrender his legal rights. Warren had threatened to make sure the entire family turned against him. Eventually, Peter left. He spent decades believing no one would ever care enough to uncover the truth. Then Daniel did. And now I had it. The missing piece. The truth Warren had buried for almost half a century. 9 days later, I asked the family to meet. Not at my home. At the old stone office building downtown. The very building Warren had claimed belonged only to blood family. Marguerite came with me. So did Peter, remotely through a video call. Warren sat at the head of the table. His sister Rosalind sat beside him. 2 cousins sat across from me. Everyone looked uncomfortable. Warren looked annoyed. I don't understand why we're here, he said. You will, I replied. He gave me the same faint smile he had worn at the funeral. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Marguerite placed the first document on the table. This estate is not being distributed according to Warren's interpretation, she said. She explained Daniel's legal ownership, his will, my inheritance. Warren's face tightened. Then he saw the second document. The old property record. Peter's name. For the first time, Warren stopped talking. Rosalind stared at him. Warren? He said nothing. I turned the laptop toward him. Peter's face appeared on the screen. Warren went completely still. His brother stared back at him. 40 years of silence sat between them. Peter spoke first. Hello, Warren. Warren looked away. I don't know what you want. Peter smiled sadly. I wanted you to admit I existed. No one spoke. Then I placed Daniel's letter on the table. Daniel knew, I said. Warren's eyes went to the envelope. What did he know? That you lied about Peter. His face changed. Not anger. Fear. Real fear. Warren picked up the letter. His hands were trembling. He unfolded it. Daniel's handwriting filled the page. Warren read silently at first. Then he reached the final paragraph. His voice broke. Dad. He stopped. Closed his eyes. Then continued. I found grandfather's records. I know what happened to Peter. I know you told everyone he abandoned us. I know that isn't true. Rosalind began crying. Warren kept reading. Daniel's final words were simple. I don't want you to lose your son because you were too proud to tell the truth. Warren lowered the letter. For a long time he said nothing. Then he looked at the screen. At Peter. I was afraid, he said. Peter didn't respond. I thought if I gave him what he wanted, the family would fall apart. Peter's voice was quiet. You didn't save the family, Warren. He paused. You taught us to be afraid of you. Warren looked down. And for the first time since I had met him, he looked less like the powerful man who had controlled every room he entered. He looked like an old father who had finally realized how much his control had cost him. I was wrong, he whispered. No one celebrated. There was no applause. No dramatic victory. Because some truths don't feel like victories. They feel like funerals for the years that could have been different. I could have taken everything. The lake house. The orchard. Every dollar Daniel had legally left me. I had the documents. I had the evidence. And after everything Warren had tried to do to me, no one would have blamed me. But Daniel had taught me something. Justice isn't always about taking everything you can. Sometimes it's about making sure the truth is finally treated fairly. So I kept everything Daniel had specifically left to me. His share. Our home. The things that belong to our life together. But I asked Marguerite to make sure the remaining family property was divided according to the original legal agreements. Peter received what had been wrongfully denied to him. Rosalind received her rightful share. The other descendants received theirs. And Warren was forced to face the consequences of choices he had spent decades pretending never happened. He didn't lose everything, but he lost something he had valued more than property.
Control.
A few weeks later, Peter came to the lake house. He stood on the porch for several minutes before touching the railing. "I used to think I'd never see this place again," he said. I smiled. "Daniel wanted you to." Peter looked toward the water. He was a good man. He was. We stood there quietly. Then Peter asked me something I wasn't expecting. "Are you angry?" I thought about it. Once I had been, but grief had changed the shape of my anger. "No," I said. "I'm tired." He nodded. "I understand." I returned to the lake house alone that autumn. The trees had turned copper and gold. The water was perfectly still. Daniel used to love this place. He said the lake made everything look honest. I walked through the rooms slowly. The old fireplace, the wooden staircase, the photographs, the room where Daniel had spent summers as a child. And I thought about the sentence Warren had spoken at the funeral. The property goes to blood family. He had believed blood was the only thing that made someone family. Daniel had spent his life proving otherwise. Family wasn't simply the name written on your birth certificate. It was the person who stayed, the person who protected you, the person who told the truth when lying would have been easier, the person who loved you without asking what you could give them in return. I stood at the edge of the lake as the sun disappeared. And for the first time since Daniel died, I didn't feel like I was standing in the shadow of his absence. I felt like I was standing inside the life he had trusted me to continue. I still missed him. I always would. But I finally understood something he had tried to teach me before he was gone. You don't defeat people like Warren by becoming like them. You don't answer control with control. You don't answer cruelty with cruelty. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is remain calm long enough for the truth to become impossible to hide. Daniel had left me property. He had left me documents. He had left me a secret. But the greatest thing he left me was the courage to stop shrinking myself just to keep someone else comfortable. The lilies from his funeral were long gone. The flowers had wilted. The candles had burned out. The people who once whispered around his casket had returned to their ordinary lives. But the truth remained. And truth has a strange way of finding its way home. I looked across the lake one last time. Then I whispered the words I wished I could have told Daniel while he was still here. "You were right. Not about the property. Not about the money. About patience. About truth. About choosing dignity when anger would be easier." I turned toward the house. My house. Our house. And I walked inside. Not because I had won, but because, after everything, I finally understood that I had never needed anyone's permission to belong there.